Consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, on Tuesday, President Trump sent Congress proposed rescissions. A rescission bill is a cut to already enacted and funded programs. Looking closely at those cuts that have been proposed by the administration, I would like to speak to them this morning on the floor. Where has the President suggested we cut a very minuscule percentage of the federal budget to fund deficit-busting tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy from bipartisan programs that both parties have supported for years, programs that help the poorest in the world survive, even lead a normal life suffering from HIV and AIDS, that help countries become healthy democracies and trading partners literally for the United States, support peacekeeping efforts to prevent the spread of war and migration, programs that counter Chinese influence and help stem the flow of illicit drugs, radio and TV stations that provide news for America. That's where the President turned to make the cuts that he wants the money for to pay for a tax cut for the wealthiest people in America. For as long as I've been in Congress, there's always been a strong bipartisan support for foreign assistance programs. Now, you ask the average person in the street in Illinois or Oklahoma, what percentage of the federal budget do you believe is spent on foreign aid? The guesses are usually 10 to 20%. It's less than 1%. There was an understanding that modest efforts like those that cost just over 1% of the federal budget were the right thing to do by both political parties. You see, by helping stem pandemics and war and helping countries become healthy, free market democracies, we're actually helping our own country. We're stopping wars and upheavals before they start and spill over borders, alleviating the future need to send our troops into harm's way, and strengthening our own national security at home by mitigating instability around the world. We are creating allies in the process and trading partners for U.S. farmers and other American businesses that make for good jobs here at home. We're also demonstrating the best of America when it comes to our values, compassion, and ingenuity, something President George W. Bush understood when he created PEPFAR, which has saved millions of lives around the world from HIV and AIDS. That's why Ronald Reagan and John McCain, no pushovers, understood the incredible power and strategic value of helping countries across the globe become free, democratic, and prosperous. So why in the world would we cut such low-cost but impactful programs? I don't understand it. If there were international programs that were ineffective, and I admit such work can be difficult and with mistakes, then the place to fix them is through the regular appropriations process, not the wholesale gutting of a complete program like USAID. And a word on equally short-sighted proposed cuts to public broadcasting. While President Trump claims that eliminating funding for public media will end PBS and NPR's so-called woke agenda, I can't even define that for you, but that was the reason given. He fails to understand that more than 70% of this funding goes to local public media stations. I think people in central Illinois, where my home is, would be hard-pressed to even explain to you what a woke agenda is on national public radio. And in rural communities, these publicly funded news stations are often the only place to get good, up-to-the-minute information and to have the kind of warnings that are necessary when extreme weather is on the way. They provide local news coverage, educational programming, and emergency and weather alerts. Without public broadcasting, how will people in Kansas and Texas learn of the tornado alerts? How will children who lack access to preschool in Idaho or South Dakota be able to receive education before kindergarten? These cuts make no sense, and I call on my Republican colleagues in a bipartisan fashion to look at the impact they're going to have objectively across America. Mr. President, on a different topic, I want to say a few words about the tragic war in Gaza. There has been so much suffering, so much death, so much destruction. The Hamas attacks on Israel of October 7th, 2023, and the taking of hostages with some 20 or 30 still left in captivity left a stunned and grieving Israel with a difficult decision. From the start, I urged Israel to learn from our mistakes in the United States that we made in anger after the terrible attacks of September 11th. We shouldn't make these life and death decisions we've learned in the fury of emotion. But I fear that lesson was not followed, and the near total destruction of Gaza and humanitarian suffering will be seen as a terrible mistake, mistakes that cause generations of pain and hurt Israel's ultimate relationship with its allies and its future. Late last year, after more than a year of horror in this small strip of land, I thought we were finally seeing some progress toward the release of the remaining hostages, a long-term ceasefire, and an easing of the humanitarian crisis. There's been a growing public demonstration from Gazans bravely protesting for an end to the rule of Hamas. That's good news. These protesters face serious threats and risk of arrest by Hamas, but they still do it, knowing Hamas has to go and does not have the people's interest at heart in Gaza. But instead of building on these modest but important openings, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu continues to put his own political survival ahead of everything. Instead of a more surgical response to Hamas or offering a long-term vision for Gaza under a reformed Palestinian leadership, Netanyahu offers nothing. He blocked all aid to Gaza for 3 months, with experts warning of mass starvation. And he restarted the fighting with no short or long-term strategy. The only strategy is to keep his coalition Israel intact. Netanyahu knows his coalition won't stand for any kind of two-state solution, so he avoids this viable path, instead threatening untold innocent lives by blocking and undermining aid delivery and restarting a dubious military offensive. Key allies and the new Pope, Pope Leo, continue to make appeals to allow aid to flow into Gaza before the famine and starvation takes hold completely. Just the other day, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert said, and I quote, "The government of Israel is currently waging a war without purpose, without goals or clear planning, and with no chance of success." Those are the words of former Israeli Prime Minister Olmert. I implore our Israeli allies to pursue a renewed ceasefire that sees the release of all remaining hostages, allows sufficient aid to flow, and advances a serious post-war vision for two states. Mr. President, I yield the floor.